Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today we are going over my week number 6 top 40 wide receiver rankings. Before this video does begin, I asked you guys this in last video, but I'm not going to see the results until the end of this weekend when I'm back. I need to know whether I should still be doing these tier list videos or I should go back to doing the start sit type videos. I don't really care which one I do. I just want to know what you guys prefer at the end of the day. That's all that really matters. We're going to start it off with S tier here. Jamar Chase going up against the Seattle Seahawks. He exploded last week against the Arizona Cardinals. 52.2 PPR fantasy points. Won a ton of people their leagues. And come on, Seattle's ranked 32nd against the pass this year so far. Regardless of the matchup, you need to be starting Jamar Chase every single week. Get him the ball. He's always effing open, baby. Get him the ball. All right, Cooper Kupp is next in S tier as well against the Arizona Cardinals. We saw vintage Cooper Kupp back in full form against the Philadelphia Eagles last Sunday. Now he gets another great matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who ranked 25th against the pass this year. The Rams offense has been clicking on all cylinders. It seems like both him and Puka can both maintain fantasy relevance throughout the rest of the season, but Cooper Kupp is still the number one option in Los Angeles. Sorry, Puka. Next is Tyreek Hill against the Carolina Panthers. He is the most explosive wide receiver in all of football. He's really shooting for that 2,000-yard mark. I'm really interested to see if he'll get there by the end of the year. But in this matchup, Carolina does have a rough passing defense. I don't think that really matters, okay? Any given week, Tyreek Hill can go for 50 fantasy points, so he is a must-start every single time. Then we have Stephon Diggs against the New York Giants, number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football right now, right behind Tyreek Hill, and for good reason. He's one of the most consistent options at the wide receiver position, and he has insane upside on a weekly basis. The Buffalo Bills as well, they pass the ball a lot. They hate running the ball, and they love passing the ball. This is a great matchup against a struggling New York Giants defense right now. It's also a get-right game for the Bills. They ended up losing last week to the Jaguars, and I'm sure they are not planning on doing that again to the Giants. Next up, we have Davante Adams against the New England Patriots. He had a down week against the Green Bay Packers last week, and that was a little bit surprising because I thought that this was going to be a Davante Adams legacy revenge type game, but sadly, we didn't see that. But I don't see those struggles continuing into this week. Davante Adams, any week that he is in your lineup, he is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode and get you massive fantasy points. When he does have that upside, he is a week winner. It's not even a question. Okay, the only thing to look out for right now is his shoulder injury. If he is 100% this Sunday, though, he is a must start, a top play every single time. Also, New England cannot stay on the field for more than 2 minutes at a time. Las Vegas should have the time of possession in their favor, so I would also expect a hefty dose of Josh Jacobs in this matchup. Moving down to A tier here, these are just players that they're not like superstar must-lock stud players every single week. They're just a little bit below that, okay? We have DJ Moore going against the Minnesota Vikings this week. DJ Moore is coming off the best game of his entire life against the Washington Commanders last Thursday night. The main problem in the past with DJ Moore has been his consistency. Is he able to perform every single week and get you a lot of fantasy points? In the past, that answer was no, but in these past 4 games, that answer has been an overwhelming yes. 26.4 PPR fantasy points is what he's averaging in his last 4 games. Do not expect this to continue whatsoever throughout the rest of the year. If that type of production continued, that would be insane. But he is still a starter every single week right now with how he's performing. Next, we have Keenan Allen against the Dallas Cowboys. Coming off that bye week are the Chargers, and this game is supposed to be the highest scoring game of the week. Vegas has the over-under set at 50.5 points. Before the bye week, Keenan Allen had a little bit of an off game, I will say, but I do expect him to get back to business in this one. With Mike Williams out for the year, his target share is going to go up even more than it was. I know he had 20 targets in that one game. Don't expect Keenan Allen to be getting 20 targets, but he should be the main focal point of this offense, as well as Austin Eckler. I don't think Joshua Palmer or Quentin Johnson are going to really step up that much into that role. I know they're going to play better than before, but Keenan Allen is still the number 1 guy here in Los Angeles. Next, we got A.J. Brown going up against the New York Jets. A.J. Brown should be a lineup lock almost every single week in fantasy football, but this matchup, I must say, is going to be pretty tough on him. Jets are second in the league right now against the pass, which leads me to think this could be a DeAndre Swift dominated game for the Eagles, considering the Eagles have the #1 offensive line in the league right now, and the Jets cannot seem to find any rhythm on offense, any consistency, should I say, on offense. So that would further just back up my assumption of DeAndre Swift going off and having a great game, and then A.J. Brown kind of taking a back seat. I also think Philly is going to try to get Devontae Smith a little bit more involved than he was last week. I think they're going to make that a priority in this game. So A.J. Brown might not play as well as normal, but he's still got to be a must start in your lineup. Moving down one more tier to B, we have CeeDee Lamb against the Los Angeles Chargers. This offense looked brutal against the 49ers on Sunday night last week. The main person to blame for that, though, is not CeeDee Lamb. It's Dak Prescott. He was playing horribly. And with us talking about the over-under set at 50.5 points, this needs to be a bounce-back game for Dak Prescott and this Cowboys team as a whole. And no other Cowboys wide receivers right now are stepping up, or they're not having good games. All right, CeeDee Lamb is playing about just as well as all the rest of them. All right, he is still the #1 wide receiver on this team by far. Los Angeles is currently ranking 31st against the pass this year. We just need Dak Prescott back on track. Find CeeDee Lamb a lot in this game, get him a lot of targets, and he is going to perform. Next up is Adam Thielen against the Miami Dolphins. Thielen has been the most consistent option on this Panthers offense so far, seeing at least 8 targets in his past 4 games and is averaging 23.7 PPR fantasy points in that stretch, which is amazing. Miami is currently ranking 23rd against the pass, and this game should not even be close. The spread is 13.5 points in the favor of the Dolphins, which is going to mean a lot more passing from this Panthers offense. Nothing new here, and most of those targets should be heading to Adam Thielen. Then we move on to Puka Nacua, also in beats here against the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of questions were answered last week when Puka and Kupp were on the field at the same time against the Philadelphia Eagles. Puka is still going to be an elite wide receiver option, even with Kupp back on the field. This is a great matchup this week against the Arizona Cardinals, but there are a ton of mouths to feed every single game. The main person or the main player that I think is going to be taking the biggest hit is going to be Tutu Atwell on a weekly basis. I think Kyren Williams still gets, all that backfield work. I think Cooper Kupp gets more involved as the weeks go on, of course, and then Puka Nacua still stays relevant. He is a lineup lock right now, averaging 23.1 fantasy points per game this year, which is good enough for wide receiver 3 on the year. You are loving that, especially for a waiver claim pickup after week 1. Next up is Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming off that ab injury. Hopefully that won't put too much of a hit into his production level. All right, the Lions have one of the best offenses right now, and that, of course, gets better when Amon-Ra is back on the field, and then Jameson Williams, as his production continues to ramp up, hopefully he becomes that wide receiver #2 that they're really looking for in Detroit. He should really start to be relevant down the latter portion of the season. I don't see him eating into Amon-Ra's workload whatsoever right now, and even later on in the year. Okay, Amon-Ra is still the #1 guy here in Detroit. I would really prefer in this game against Tampa Bay. I was talking about it last video when we mentioned David Montgomery. I want to see what happens when they fall behind early. I am hoping that the Bucs pull ahead early in this one and that the Detroit Lions have to come from behind, because Amon-Ra is going to get even more work, even more targets in that scenario. Next up, we got Mike Evans going up against the Detroit Lions on the opposite side of the ball in that game. Finally off the injury report as of Friday. I'm about 5 to 10% concerned, though. There is a high risk of re-aggravation to that hamstring. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but as a receiver, you need to be really explosive off the line of scrimmage. That's why I'm just a little bit worried. That being said, Mike Evans is a must start. This is a great matchup for Evans if he is fully healthy, and the Bucs passing game as a whole. Thielen went crazy last week against this Lions defense, and I would expect more of the same from Evans and Godwin. But Mike Evans has been Baker Mayfield's go-to deep threat target. If he can get loose in this game, he could have a big day. Next, we got Jalen Waddle going against the Carolina Panthers in C tier. At some point, Jalen Waddle is going to have a huge game. It's just a matter of when that is going to be. All right, not that he's playing really bad as of late. It's just that this Dolphins offense is so explosive, and they are scoring so many points. He just happens to kind of... he's kind of became an afterthought in this offense with Raheem Mostert going crazy, with Devin Achane going crazy, with Tyreek Hill going crazy. he's kind of been the fourth person talked about in this offense. This week against the Carolina Panthers, not the most favorable matchup in the world, I must say. Their passing defense is top 10 in the league, but the Dolphins offense is just so good right now, so explosive that I don't know if I could bench Waddle. I really couldn't. Next, we got Garrett Wilson going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. I love Garrett Wilson as a player, but let me tell you, I do not trust Zach Wilson and this team to be consistent week after week after week. That being said, this Eagles passing defense will let you throw on them. All right, with Jalen Carter being ruled out, there might be some room for Breece Hall to run in this one as well. If he does not get going, though, if he starts struggling in this one, I would expect the passing game to obviously be the primary focus for the Jets, which would mainly benefit Garrett Wilson here. I would expect a bumpy ride from Garrett Wilson with some high peaks and really low valleys throughout the rest of this year. Next up, we have Calvin Ridley going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Finally, Ridley got back on track last week against a massively beat up Buffalo Bills secondary. Hopefully, we're going to see a follow through against the Colts this week, who let him score 24.1 PPR fantasy points in week 1 of the season. Got him off to that hot start, and then he kind of let us all down those next couple of weeks. This Jags offense, though, I will say, they finally seem to be clicking a little bit better than the start of the season. The interesting part about week 1, though, is that Christian Kirk was almost irrelevant in that matchup. I'm really wondering if the Jags are going to make it a point to get him more involved in this week 6 game against the Colts. The good news for Ridley, though, is the Colts play the most zone defense out of any team in the entire NFL, which Ridley plays much better against than man. Ridley just needs his targets, all right? Get this man the ball, and he will perform for you. Next up, we got Nico Collins going up against the New Orleans Saints. This is a tough matchup against the Saints, who have been solid all year on the defensive end. He's been really boom or bust here to start off the year, but it's really hard to bench Nico Collins because his upside is so dang high. This Texans offense also has looked very good so far this year. With Tank Dell out of this game, Nico Collins should see more targets in this one. I would also be upgrading Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz in this matchup since Tank Dell is not playing. Moving it down one more tier here to D, we have Devontae Smith against the New York Jets. Listen, this is a tough matchup, but like I said, when we're talking about A.J. Brown, I feel like the Eagles are going to make it a point to get Devontae Smith more involved this week than he was last week, certainly. Okay, the Eagles have one of the best offenses in the entire league, and Smith was just the odd man out in that game against the Rams last week. Still a weekly wide receiver 2 or flex play, in my opinion, in this game. If his targets continue to be low over the next couple of weeks, then I would get a little bit more concerned about Devontae Smith. But as of right now, he is a massive buy low candidate in fantasy for me. Next, we got DeAndre Hopkins against the Baltimore Ravens. I was really starting to wonder if the old DeAndre Hopkins would ever make a return in fantasy, and he finally did, thank God. 8 catches for 140 yards on 11 targets against the Indianapolis Colts. Now he goes up against the Baltimore Ravens, who is undoubtedly a tougher defense. They have much tougher of a defense than the Colts have this year. If this wasn't the Titans we were talking about, then I would have DeAndre Hopkins much higher up on this list. But this is a team that just loves to run the football. Derrick Henry, Tajay Spears has been getting involved heavily. I'm still saying to start DeAndre Hopkins this week, but I'm more confident in everybody above him. I think that's pretty clear here. Next, we got Deebo Samuel in that same matchup against the Cleveland Browns. Same exact situation with Deebo to Ayuk right now, except he has been less dependable this year than Ayuk has. All right, he will have his boom weeks where he goes for 25, 30 PPR fantasy points, but I'm expecting that not to be the case in this game. Clearly, this over-under is also set to 35.5 points, so Vegas does not see a lot of scoring possible in this one. Next up, we got Marquise Brown against the Los Angeles Rams. He is questionable into this game on Sunday with an illness of some sort. If he does play, I would be starting him 100%. He has been the most consistent option for this Cardinals offense this year. Has seen 10 targets in 3 out of the last 4 games, and Dobbs has he's done the job. He's done all right. He hasn't been anything amazing, but he's done good. Okay, tough matchup against the Rams this week, but A.J. Brown just had a great game against them last week. There will be some room to operate against this defense. The over-under in this game is set to 48.5 points. A lot of scoring expected by Las Vegas. So Marquise Brown should be involved. Next, we got Chris Olave going up against the Houston Texans. Super frustrating last couple of weeks for Chris Olave, mainly due to that Derek Carr shoulder injury. Kamara and Michael Thomas have really been the main beneficiaries of that injury more than Chris Olave has. That's certainly true. Houston is currently ranking 4th against the pass right now, so it doesn't get my hopes too high that I'll have an amazing game. That being said, I do think he's going to have a better game than the past 2 weeks. That's for sure. At least, we got to hope so. We got to hope so at this point. Next up, we have Chris Godwin moving down to E tier against the Detroit Lions. Would have obviously been higher up on this list if Mike Evans missed this game, but he was upgraded to a full participant in practice on Friday, so he should play. Week number 4 before the bye week for the Tampa Bay Bucks was Chris Godwin's best game of the year so far against the Saints, but Mike Evans, he was missing since the second quarter. So I don't know if you can expect exactly the same production this week. Seattle is ranking 22nd so far this year against the pass right now, and the Bucks have been looking good as a team so far, though. With Evans back in the lineup, of course, Evans becomes the #1 target on this team, but I still do see Chris Godwin having a good game in this one. I'm expecting around 15 PPR fantasy points for Godwin. I think he's a start in most league formats. Next up is Michael Pittman Jr. going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. With Anthony Richardson being out, it lowers his value just a bit because their connection was very solid at the beginning of this season, at least for the first 2 games. Against the Jaguars in week number 1, Pittman scored 23.7 PPR fantasy points on 11 targets and had at least 11 targets in the following 2 games as well. But since week number 4, he has been trending in the opposite direction, the wrong direction. He scored just 4.5 fantasy points and 10.2 in the last 2 games since then. This game should provide a nice little bounce back opportunity for him, though. Minshew doesn't look terrible so far, so I don't expect the Jags offense to take a massive hit. But I will say once JT gets more involved again and takes over that real #1 running back role, they'll probably lean on him a bit more and pass a bit less. Next is DK Metcalf going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. DK is a wide receiver 1 this year. For some reason, that doesn't see wide receiver 1 targets. It doesn't make any sense to me. Hasn't seen over 8 targets yet this season, and that really puts a severe ceiling on his production if that keeps continuing. Hoping to see a good amount of points put up in this game, though, against the Cincinnati Bengals. It would definitely benefit Metcalf heavily if the Bengals end up pulling out ahead early and he can get more involved in the passing game. Obviously, he's still a solid play in my mind. My only concern is that target share. I want to see him get in double digits. For that #1 wide receiver with his level of talent, he needs to get the ball more. Next is Jacoby Myers against the New England Patriots. Could this be a Jacoby Myers revenge game? Possibly. Every week with Jimmy G at quarterback so far, Myers has seen at least 10 targets, which is very impressive considering that Davante Adams is on the opposite side of the field as him. All right, he's actually outperformed Davante Adams 2 out of the 5 games this season. All right, Adams did drop a dud last week against Green Bay. We talked about this earlier. I do expect him to have a huge bounce back game. That's why I have Myers a bit lower on my list this week. I think this could really be a Davante Adams explosion game. But nonetheless, Myers is going to have a good day. Next, we got T. Higgins against the Seattle Seahawks. If he ends up playing, he practiced fully on Friday, so he should play in this game, but he's still questionable for this weekend. As of last week, hopefully the Bengals are starting to find their rhythm on the offensive side of things. The games where T. Higgins has dropped duds in fantasy so far aren't completely his fault. Most of the targets were really uncatchable balls, and the numbers don't tell the entire story there. I would be trading for T. Higgins right now rather than trying to get rid of him. If you already have gotten rid of him, not much you can do, but he is still a buy low in my eyes. When everybody on this offense starts clicking together, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon even, they're a deadly offense. You want to be buying into this offense. Next, we got Christian Kirk against the Indianapolis Colts. Kirk has been really shining over these past 4 weeks since he has been seeing such a large target share on this Jags offense. Even though the targets are fluctuating, he's still at over 6 all 4 of those weeks. As we talked about earlier, Christian Kirk was almost irrelevant against the Indianapolis Colts in week number 1. I'm definitely looking for that to change in week 6 here. Although Kirk dominates in versus man coverage, I will say he has also been playing great versus zone coverage as well, which the Colts play the most of out of any team in the league currently. He should have a solid day here. Next, we got Zay Flowers going up against the Tennessee Titans. The Titans usually allow most of their yards up through the air, I will say. Although that was certainly not the case last week. Zach Moss ran wild against them for some reason. The Titans are currently ranking 25th against the pass right now, and Flowers is coming off a game against the Steelers where he should have had much better of a day. All right, he could not stay on his feet whatsoever in that game. Dropped one or two balls, I believe it was, but he still ended up with 12.3 PPR fantasy points. He's been consistent the entire year, just having, good games, not great, not horrible, just good games. He's still yet to have that breakout game. It's going to happen any week now. This could certainly be the one against the Tennessee Titans. I'm hoping their defense can also limit Lamar Jackson's legs a little bit, and hopefully they'll have to throw the ball a bit more than normal in this one. Next up is Gabe Davis, dropping it down one more tier to F here against the New York Giants. What can I say about Gabe Davis? Every single week I've been saying that his target share hasn't really been there, that, he's basically touchdown dependent most weeks. The guy just keeps finding the end zone every single week. I'm not going to do this with you all year, Gabe. I'm really not, all right? I'm not insanely high on him the rest of the season, but I'm not going to leave him off this list, especially when he's been a top 15 fantasy wide receiver up to this point in the year. This should be a clear bounce back game situation for the Buffalo Bills against a rough New York Giants defense so far. The targets, like I said, are usually my problem with Gabe Davis, but I guess it really doesn't matter when you find the end zone most games. Next up is Jordan Addison against the Chicago Bears. This is the first game with Justin Jefferson on IR. How is Jordan Addison going to perform? How is KJ Osborne going to perform? How is TJ Hawkinson going to perform in his absence? We're just going to have to see. Also, I really want to see how the defense plays Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne. Who is that number one cornerback going to be covering each game? That's going to really decide whether Jordan Addison or KJ Osborne has the great fantasy day. So far this season, Addison has been super reliable every other week than against the Carolina Panthers, where he was a complete afterthought. He only had one target in that game, but that should not happen while Justin Jefferson is out especially. This right here against the Bears is a great matchup for Kirk Cousins to perform well. Hopefully, he takes advantage of that. Moving on to KJ Osborne against the Chicago Bears in that same matchup. Exact same situation that I was just talking about, but I had to give the edge slightly to Jordan Addison here. I just think he has more potential and has shown it so far into the year. Osborne so far has needed a TD to be really relevant in fantasy. I don't think that's as much of the case without Justin Jefferson on the field. He could see an increase in targets and should be fantasy relevant, so that's why he is in F tier here. That sounds so bad, in F tier, like it's the worst tier. There's actually a G tier, so this is not the final tier for KJ Osborne and Jordan Addison. Moving on to Tyler Lockett against the Cincinnati Bengals. Lockett has only one game so far this year with over 10 PPR fantasy points. He has been really disappointing considering how well he played last season. I do expect him to get back on track. I don't know if it's going to be this game. I don't know if it's going to be next game. That's the real question in my mind. When is it going to happen? Jackson Smith and Jigba really hasn't done too much to impact Tyler Lockett's role up to this point either, which makes me wonder what could happen if JSN does get a lot more playing time and then Lockett kind of takes a back seat. That could not be good for him. So far into the season, by the way, Geno Smith has been struggling, and Cincinnati in this matchup, they don't have a bad defense whatsoever. So I think there's much better plays out there than Tyler Lockett. If you have to play him at your flex, I really don't mind though. Next, we got Josh Downs going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'll say it, I'm pretty high on Josh Downs this week, considering how well he has played with Gardner Minshew so far in our little sample size that we've seen. Week number 3, when Anthony Richardson was out, Downs drew 12 targets in that matchup. And then in week 5, when Richardson went down in the second quarter, he scored 15.7 PPR fantasy points. Those 2 games were his highest of the season up to this point. Of course, Michael Pittman is still the number 1 wide receiver in Indianapolis, but he should also draw away those number 1 cornerbacks, which will therefore leave more room for Downs to work. Next up, we got Amari Cooper going up against the San Francisco 49ers. Cooper is normally a borderline top 15 fantasy play on a weekly basis for me, but not when Deshaun Watson is out. All right, they are also going up against a great defense here. Although San Francisco is not the best against the pass, perhaps, they're still going to put a lot of pressure on PJ Walker in this matchup. Not saying that you can't start Cooper at the flex spot at the very most, but I would definitely lower your expectations and be ready for anything in this one. Moving on to G tier, the last tier on our list today, we have Terry McLaurin against the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta has a top 5 passing defense up to this point in the season. Washington's offense also has not looked great so far, even though Howell has been playing all right. The offensive line has not been holding up. Terry McLaurin, though, he has shown glimpses that he is still a great wide receiver and still very viable in fantasy football against the Eagles, most notably. But most weeks, his target sits around that 6 range, which does not make me confident whatsoever. He's still the #1 receiving option in Washington, although Logan Thomas has been getting a lot of looks lately, so he might end up being the #2 option this year. We'll have to see. I really think Terry McLaurin is super underrated, though, and he's still a great NFL wide receiver. Next up, we got Drake London going against the Washington Commanders. This is a good matchup against the Commanders, who got absolutely torched last week by DJ Moore and the Chicago Bears. But this Falcons offense at the end of the day would ultimately rather run the ball into the ground than throw the ball if they're in that situation. So it's very hard to tell each week. If the Falcons pull ahead early, they could just run the ball the entire time, and Drake London could end up getting 4 to 5 targets. That is not going to be fantasy viable. That's not going to be a good fantasy day for Drake London. But if they fall down early, he could see 15, 20 fantasy points. So the potential is clearly there. And if you want to take the risk, I completely understand. But that's exactly what it is. It's definitely a high risk, mid-tier reward situation, in my opinion. Next, we got Michael Thomas against the Houston Texans. Michael Thomas so far has been Mr. Consistent for the New Orleans Saints. If you want 9 to 12 PPR fantasy points on a weekly basis, just put in Michael Thomas in your flex spot. All right, he hasn't shown that he's really has that explosive upside so far this year just yet, but his target share has been there every single game. Even last week in that blowout against the New England Patriots, he still got his targets. So you know exactly what you're getting from Michael Thomas. At number 40 today, we have Joshua Palmer against the Dallas Cowboys. He saw a bump in targets the first game with Mike Williams out, but he didn't really cash in too many times. He saved the game with a long catch, I will say, but he did have a few costly drops there. And we talked about it earlier with CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen. This is the highest projected scoring game of the week. So let me take a shot on Joshua Palmer here, I guess. That being said, obviously, all 39 players above Joshua Palmer, I would rather play than him. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure, as always, to drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Good luck in week number 6, and I will catch you in the waiver wire video on Tuesday. Peace.